Dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first official live event of the Alliance of Academies in Budapest. But anyway, it's the first official event of the Alliance anywhere outside Germany. Last October, when we were sitting in Berlin in the beautiful building of the Akademie Künste, I was wondering what the Alliance of Academies is going to be. And I was wondering if we ever can travel again. So it's a pleasure and an honor and a very nice surprise that I can welcome you all here in Budapest. Thank you for coming. And now I will give the floor to Daljit Nagra, the moderator of tonight's event.
Thank you, Ferenc, and thank you for hosting today's event, wherever you've gone. Oh, you're behind me, sorry. And obviously, Ferenc is the president of the Society of Hungarian Authors. So welcome to Battle with the Empty Sky. This is the final conversation of the two-day period of a kick-off, a first event for our alliance. So we're hoping to have future events in celebrating the freedom of the arts in places such as Germany, with a city to be confirmed later on, Poland, Spain, maybe Italy, maybe other countries. We just don't know yet. But Christian sitting there will determine the fate of future events. And Christian is, in a sense, the director almost, although we don't use that word, do we, Christian, of the European Alliance of Academies. And they are bringing the event today. So the European Alliance of Academies is a union of about 65 arts and cultural institutions from across Europe, including Great Britain. My home country. We support, with the European Alliance of Academies, we support each other in times of difficulty, times of strain. We offer comfort, we offer protest, we offer words against institutions who are bringing us down. We engage in creative products and projects. I probably meant to say projects, didn't I? We engage in creative projects to bind our nations, our institutions together, so we have a kind of a greater harmony in our institutional and international setup. So this is this may feel puny, tiny, diminutive, worthless, but actually we are speaking in a bigger context, and we have an online presence today, and we are getting bigger all the time. Thank you to Christian, and thank you to our academics and writers who are here. I'll mention the authors who are here first, then we have a video message, very exciting. This is very interdisciplinary today. So our authors, I'm obviously here on behalf of the Royal Society of Literature. I'm the chair of the Royal Society of Literature in Britain. I'm the first non-white chair in 200 years. Okay? We have to assume I'm not white. I haven't painted myself up. So on my farthest there, we have László Martón. Oh, you can see the sign, couldn't you? He's an essayist, he's a novelist, and he's a playwright. Well done, László. He's... sorry, I missed that one, didn't I? Sorry. I was going to mention that later. I haven't got much to say. His works include, I just want to mention two of his titles, because they're such good titles. You're an Animal and The Great Budapest Monster Chase. So I must read both of those, they sound great. He's a translator of several novelists into Hungarian, notably the works of Goethe, Kleist, and Novalis. Our favourite authors, in a way. I love all three. Well done. And next to László, we have Anna Gács. Anna Gács. Sorry, Anna. Anna is a critic, a literary critic, and a translator. She has been chair of the Hungarian Society of Writers and is a founding member of the Hungarian Network of Academics. That sounds really prestigious. Thank you and well done. She has translated from English the works of writers such as Germaine Greer, Jeanette Winterson, and Ian McEwan. And I could go on longer, but I'll just mention those three. Very impressive. Yeah, very. Yeah, I could mention them all. We could stay here till 9:30, couldn't we? But so, and right next to me is Robert Menasse. He's a novelist and he lives in Vienna. He's one of those rare things. He's just a novelist. He doesn't have a day job. He hasn't had a day job for a long time because he's a successful novelist, I assume. His novels have been translated into over 20 languages. And I'm keeping translations a theme here because this is an international collaboration. His most recent novel, The Capital, which I've ordered online today, I look forward to reading that, won a prestigious Chinese Novel of the Year award. But it happened during lockdown, so poor Robert couldn't go to China to collect his cash prize. And was it some sort of statue they gave you?
I guess it was lost at it got lost at the post. Yeah.
It will arrive one day, I'm sure. Or we can offer you one. I'll offer you one when I've read your book, and if it's any good. Now, I am going to introduce somebody who's not actually here, couldn't be here, but we'll hear their voice on video. And that is Professor Janine Meraptel. I said that right, didn't I? And she is a filmmaker and president of the Akademie der Künste in Berlin. The European Alliance of Academies was founded in October 2020 at the Akademie der Künste in Berlin on her initiative. So she is the kind of mother source, the mutti of the European Alliance of Academies. We shall now hear from her.
Dear all, unfortunately, I cannot be with you in Budapest today in person. I use this medium to convey to you my warmest greetings. The European Alliance of Academies is a large association that wants to have an impact both transnationally and locally. It is thanks to the initiative of the Society of Hungarian Authors that today's event in Budapest happens, together with the Akademie der Künste and other partner institutions of the European Alliance of Academies. I would like to thank Ferenc Cinki in particular and everyone else involved. Today's panel members, the facilitators of the preceding workshops for students in Budapest, all that makes this meeting possible in front of and behind the scenes. And I thank Germany's Federal Agency for Civic Education, we call it BPB, for financially supporting today's event. Language has helped people to build entire cultures, create myths, and tackle common endeavors. I quote Yuval Noah Harari in A Brief History of Humankind: "The ability to create an imagined reality out of words enabled large numbers of strangers to cooperate effectively. But it also did something more. Since large-scale human cooperation is based on myths, the way people cooperate can be altered by changing the myths, by telling different stories. Under the right circumstances, myths can change rapidly." End of quote. Shared language unites us, but there is also a downside. Language can also be used to divide. With language, we can exclude and hurt each other. With language, we can create fake news and realities or also myths that cause harm. When we look at the language of AfD politicians, a party founded in Germany in 2013, that is present now in parliaments all over Germany, we understand what populist rhetoric means. Their slogans are we, us, our people, our fatherland, our culture. They present themselves as representatives of a uniform national culture from which they exclude many social groups as not belonging. This is one of the strategies that right-wing politicians use in their attempts to exclude others, to destroy the diversity of our societies in general. It is necessary to identify these mechanisms so that we can do something about them, because this uniform national culture does not exist in reality and never has. The diversity of our societies also means multilingualism in Europe. We, in this case, we use the we in its inclusive form, leaving no one out. We want to work to ensure that this abundance of languages is not used for exclusion, I think we say, for exclusion or discrimination. We, that is in this case the members of the European Alliance of Academies and all those who are committed to democratic coexistence in Europe and beyond. Thank you and lots of warmest regards.
Come back, team, wherever you are. Also to mention, we have two other members who are running workshops today. So we have Luc Devoldere, who's here, and he ran a session on freedoms of a writer, and Sophie Collins ran a session yesterday about creating a vocabulary for the future. So they will be invited to speak whenever they want. Imagine yourselves an extended panel. I just want to make 3 points, I think, then I'll open it up. So it's interesting to hear Janine talk about divisive language, and I think of my own background. My parents came to Britain because the British went to the colonies, to Caribbean islands, to India, to West Africa, looking for workers. Okay, so we helped those migrants from the 1950s on, helped to build Britain, to make it great again. And they contributed significantly to the Great Britain. And then we had the second wave of migration from around 2000. And now we have the language of contempt, towards migrants. And it's been there for a while. And I found it unsettling for the last 2 or so decades to hear the imagery that's used about migrants, to the point of Brexit. And we still have some of that language around. So we had that kind of language hostility, but there's another language which is silent in British culture, which is British failure to make babies. They haven't made enough children, and therefore they've had to go abroad to get migrants. And now they've sent the migrants back, but there's still no talk about making babies, and British people can't make babies because we live in a free market. Houses are too expensive, people have to work all the time, and their wages are not enough. So we have this language of, I guess, almost a surplus of contempt and a deficit of love about making, children. Most people can't make, most of my friends have either one or no children. They can't afford to make a second. I was very lucky, I had a second child, my wife, but it was hard work. And the other points I want to make, maybe this will pick up on this, but you can talk about that as well. Is the about making children, Robert. You can tell us your own story. Yeah, we'll come to. And just so we may talk about national literature, which is something that really interests me, a literature that a nation creates. And so I've been quite negative about Britain, but one of the positive things that's happened in the last decade is that the curriculum has expanded. People like me are taught at schools. For 16-year-olds, 18-year-olds, we have ethnic minorities work being taught. So the canon is opening up, and we have women in the canon, and women are being discovered. Historic women have been discovered into the canon. And at universities, we have decolonizing the curriculum, where the curriculum is being diversified. So if you teach Chaucer, you may have a a woman who's written an academic piece, or a black Asian writer, or either a creative piece in response or an essay. We're welcoming people to look at that. Obviously some men of privilege don't want that to happen, but on the whole, we seem to be moving progressively forward, I think, towards diversifying the curriculum. And maybe Sophie will mention something about that in terms of Scotland. You are living in Scotland and teaching in Scotland, don't you, Sophie? Okay. We'll come back, yeah. And okay, I'm going to open up, so I've done enough talking. I'm going to open it up to my panel. Maybe Robert, I'll turn to you first. If you'd like to say anything about making babies or national literature, I leave that to you.
With your allowance, I would like to speak in German. You have headphones for the translation. It's human right for poets and writers to speak in their mother tongue. Ich bin überzeugt davon, oder ich glaube, dass es zunächst einmal wichtig ist, ein paar grundsätzliche Anmerkungen über Nation oder Nationalismus zu machen. Ich möchte zunächst an Folgendes erinnern. Es gab in Europa vor einiger Zeit folgende Situation. Wir hatten einen gemeinsamen Markt, eine gemeinsame Währung, einen gemeinsamen Rechtszustand, eine gemeinsame Verwaltung, kann auch sagen Bürokratie, und ein gemeinsames Parlament und lokale oder regionale Parlamente. Das war die österreichisch-ungarische Monarchie. Dieses System eines gemeinsamen Marktes, einer gemeinsamen Währung, einer gemeinsamen Bürokratie und eines gemeinsamen Parlaments ist nicht deshalb gescheitert, weil dieses System nicht funktionieren konnte, sondern weil es von den Nationalisten in die Luft gesprengt wurde. This is, I didn't know. You are the consecutive translation. Okay, very sorry. Yeah.
So, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to say that I'm convinced that it's very important to point out that we have to make basic comments about nation and nationalism. Because a certain while ago in Europe, a special situation came into existence, namely that we had a common market, we had a common currency, and we had a common legislation. And also we had a common administrative system with a common parliament, and also local parliaments and regional parliaments. What was this? This was the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. This was the common system. And it failed, not because it didn't function well, it failed because of nationalism, and it was exploded by nationalism.
Und nachdem die Nationalisten dieses in Teilen gemeinsame Europa in die Luft gesprengt hatten, entstanden eine Reihe kleiner Nationalstaaten.
And afterwards, so that is, the nationalists exploded this little system in the heart of Europe, and little nation states came into existence.
Und alle diese kleinen Nationalstaaten waren dann schutzlos ausgeliefert und zu schwach, um sich zu wehren gegen globale Gefahren und globale Bedrohungen.
And these nation states afterwards were not enough to defend themselves. they were too vulnerable and they were not able to protect themselves from outside risks and threats.
Und alle diese Nationalstaaten, die das gemeinsame Europa der Habsburger Monarchie in die Luft gesprengt hatten, hatten danach nicht einen einzigen Tag in größerer Freiheit, größerem Wohlstand und größerer Rechtssicherheit als davor.
So after this explosion of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, these little nation states didn't have a day when their freedom or their security was bigger than in the Austro-Hungarian monarchy.
Im Gegenteil, es hat ausgelöst 2 mörderische Weltkriege, Bürgerkriege, autoritäre Systeme wie den Stalinismus oder den Faschismus.
It was just the contrary. So after this situation that the Austro-Hungarian monarchy exploded, there came 2 murderous wars, World War I and World War II. And we had numerous civil wars, and we had authoritarian systems like the Stalinism and fascism.
Besser, ein bisschen besser und dann mit wachsendem Wohlstand besser wurde es für all diese Nationalstaaten erst, als sie wieder eintraten in die nachnationale Entwicklung der Europäischen Union.
And their situation became a little better concerning their welfare and security when after this after nationalism, that is in the post-nationalism, they entered the European Union.
Und das ist der Grund, warum ich nicht verstehen kann und intellektuell nicht nachvollziehen kann und emotional nicht akzeptieren kann, warum in all diesen Staaten heute wieder der Nationalismus stärker wird.
And this is why I cannot really understand intellectually or even emotionally why nationalism is becoming stronger and stronger in these nation states.
Der Nationalismus ist eine, wie sich in der Geschichte herausgestellt hat, kriminelle Ideologie.
And as it has turned out throughout history, nationalism is a criminalistic ideology.
Und deswegen können wir nicht einfach über Nationalismus diskutieren, ohne uns dessen bewusst zu sein, dass wir uns auch dagegen wehren müssen.
And whenever we talk about nationalism, we have to be aware of the fact that we have to protect ourselves against nationalism.
Aber kommen wir ganz kurz in 2, 3 Sätzen zur Literatur.
And also let's say a couple of sentences about literature.
Es gibt in Wirklichkeit keine Nationalliteratur.
So in reality, there's no national literature.
Ich kenne zum Beispiel keinen Schriftsteller, der einigermaßen bei Sinnen ist, der sagt, ich will Nationalliteratur schreiben.
I do not know of any writer or author who has his or her common sense and would say that I want to write national literature.
Andererseits weiß ich schon, dass Literatur die an einem bestimmten Ort, in einer bestimmten Gesellschaft, in einer bestimmten historischen Situation produziert wird, Bedeutung hat für die Gesellschaft und für die Sprache, in der sie entsteht. Und eine andere Bedeutung, als sie für andere Sprachen und Kulturen hat.
However, I know it all too well that if in a certain society, at a certain place and in a certain historical situation, some kind of literature is generated or it is created, then it has a big significance for that particular language and that particular society and culture.
Zum Beispiel, mir ist schon bewusst, dass man zum Beispiel James Joyce in Irland anders liest als überall sonst in der Welt.
For example, if you read James Joyce, you read it in a different way in Ireland and in a different way elsewhere in the world.
In Irland ist diese sozusagen nationale Lektüre ein Teil der irischen Selbstreflexion und Selbstdefinition einer Identität, einer kulturellen Identität.
For example, in Ireland, it is part of national literature, it is part of self-reflection of the nation and self-identity in the culture.
Aber wenn James Joyce nichts hätte, was darüber hinaus interessant wäre, würde kein Mensch auf der Welt James Joyce lesen.
However, if James Joyce was not interesting elsewhere from another perspective in the world, then obviously no one else would read James Joyce, only the Irish.
Das zeigt, dass sozusagen auch der nationale Charakter von Literatur nicht das Entscheidende ist, was Literatur ausmacht.
And this, in this sense, I mean, this shows that national literature is not something that specifies, or being national is not something that specifies literature. It has another layer and it says much more to the other parts of the world.
Ja, also das nur als Eingangsstatement. Es gibt noch wahnsinnig viel dazu zu sagen. Aber was ich vorausschicken wollte, ist zweierlei. Erstens, Nationalismus ist eine Bedrohung. Nationalismus ist kein Koordinatensystem für Literatur oder unsere Identität. Und Literatur muss mehr haben als eine nationale Bedeutung, um Literatur zu sein. Das nur mal als These vorab.
So this was just an introduction on my side. There are two important thoughts here that I wanted to point out. On the one side, on the one hand, nationalism is a threat, and also literature shouldn't be defined by nationalism. If literature is just nationalistic or national literature, then it's not literature. If you want to talk about literature, then it's much more than that.
Thank you, Robert. That's really helpful. Anna, shall I come to you? We'll pick up on some of the observations you made, Robert, in a while. So, Anna or László, would you like to? Okay.
Ja, ich möchte mich anschließen an die Worte des Robert Menasse. Wir haben eine sehr gute Weltliteraturkonzeption seit der Aufklärung. Und ein Autor, der etwas wert ist, will, und ich füge hinzu, soll Weltliteratur schreiben und danach streben. Diese Konzeption aus der Aufklärung und der Goethe-Zeit ist vielleicht veraltet. Das muss weiterentwickelt werden. Und man muss die ganze Welt in Betracht gezogen werden. Aber wenn wir auf unseren Raum blicken, ich meine Ungarn, dann stelle ich immer die Frage, was gehört zur ungarischen Literatur? Einerseits gibt es Autoren, die gebürtige Ungarn sind, aber nicht oder nicht nur Ungarisch schreiben, wie zum Beispiel der große Humanist János Pannonius, der seine Gedichte auf Lateinisch schrieb und doch in den Schulen als Teil der ungarischen Literatur unterrichtet wird. Oder ein anderes Beispiel, István Széchenyi war ein großartiger Politiker und nebenbei gesagt Gegner des Nationalismus, und er schrieb seine Hauptwerke auf Deutsch. Wer nicht Deutsch liest, kann diese Texte in ungarischer Übersetzung lesen. Oder aber ein noch extremeres Beispiel, der Autor Zsigmond Remenyik verbrachte 10 Jahre in der Jugendzeit in Südamerika und schrieb die ersten Erzählungen und Romane auf Spanisch. Gehören sie nicht zur ungarischen Literatur? Ich glaube schon. Andererseits gehören...
So I couldn't agree more with Robert, because if you look at literature, then since the Enlightenment, you have to view literature as word literature. For example, if you speak about any author, they need to write and they need to strive to become word literature. Or if you look at Goethe's concept, then it must be further developed. And whenever you talk about literature, whenever you write literature, you must have the whole word in your view. For example, if I talk about Hungary or the Hungarian literature, now what belongs to Hungarian literature? For example, if I mention the famous Hungarian writer János Pannonius, he wrote in Latin. However, he is treated as part of Hungarian literature, and in Hungarian schools, it is part of the curriculum about Hungarian literature. Or I could also mention István Széchenyi, a famous politician who, by the way, was against nationalism. He wrote his works in German, and obviously those who cannot speak German, they can read their works in Hungarian translation. Or if I want to mention an even more extreme example, then I can mention Zsigmond Remenyik, who spent 10 years in Latin America, and he wrote his first works in Spanish. So I asked the question, what is Hungarian literature?
Und andererseits, wie ist die Lage mit den Übersetzungen? Gehören sie nicht zur Literatur der Zielsprache, zum Beispiel die Bibelübersetzung? Wir haben eine protestante Bibelübersetzung von Gaspar Károly. Übte diese Übersetzung keine Wirkung auf die Entwicklung der ungarischen Literatur?
And also here I have to mention translation. Isn't it part of the literature of the target language? It is. For example, we need to think about the Bible translations. We Hungarians have an excellent Protestant translation of the Bible from Gaspar Károly. So again, what is part of literature?
Oder es gibt einen großartigen Dichter im 19. Jahrhundert, János Arany. Er übersetzte zahlreiche Stücke von Shakespeare, unter anderem Hamlet und Komödien von Aristophanes. Diese Werke gehören zu seinem Œuvre und deshalb gehören sie auch zur ungarischen Literatur. Shakespeare ist ein ungarischer Autor in diesem Sinne des Wortes. Und als ich Goethes Faust übersetzte. Das tat ich als Schriftsteller, als ungarischer Schriftsteller, der aber Kontakte mit der Weltliteratur hat.
Or for example, I can mention János Arany from the 19th century. He translated, for example, Aristophanes' works, or he translated Hamlet from Shakespeare. So in the Hungarian translation, it is part of the Hungarian literature, or also Goethe's Faust was translated into Hungarian, then it is also part of Hungarian literature.
Ich hatte einmal eine Gastprofessur in Berlin und unterrichtete unter anderem auch ungarische Werke. Zum Beispiel Werke von Sándor Márai. Und ich beobachtete, dass diese Werke in deutscher Übersetzung völlig anders wirken als im Originale. Es gibt den Roman Glut, und das lässt sich in deutschem Kontext wie ein Thomas Mann-Roman lesen. Im ungarischen Original dagegen ist es eher verkitscht.
Or for example, in Vienna, there was a guest professor who taught the works of Sándor Márai, and in German translation, it sounds completely different than in Hungarian, in the original Hungarian. It rather sounds like Thomas Mann, and in Hungarian, it is much more tacky, and in German, it's completely different, although it's a translation.
Und ich kann noch weitere Beispiele anführen. Wichtig ist, dass diese Missverständnisse sehr produktiv werden können und bereichern auch die Rezeption in der Originalsprache. Und ich denke, Weltliteratur ist ein Kommunikationsprozess. Und das bedeutet nicht, dass die Sprachen, die Nationalsprachen aussterben sollten, sondern dass man in viele Richtungen aufpassen müsste. Also die Literatur ist sprachlich bedingt, daran kann man nicht ändern.
So I could list a lot of examples. But what is very important that even if there are some misunderstandings, for example, through translation, then this also enriches the works written in the original language. And if you look at the word literature, then it is a communication process. So it doesn't mean that if I talk about word literature, then all of the national languages have to die out. It rather means that you have to think in different directions. And yes, of course, it's very important that literature is specified by language, and you cannot put this aside.
Dazu gehört noch, was das Karpatenbecken betrifft, die Zweisprachigkeit. In den Nachbarstaaten, man spricht sehr viel von Nationalismen und Unterdrückung der Minderheiten, aber dabei vergisst man, dass in der Slowakei, in Rumänien, in Serbien große ungarische Gemeinden leben, die praktisch zweisprachig sind. Und deshalb die slowakische, teilweise die tschechische, die rumänische und die südslawische Literaturen vermitteln können.
And also if you think about the Carpathian Basin, then you have to talk about duality of languages. For example, in this region, very often you hear about the oppression of minorities, etc., etc. But if you look at Romania or Serbia, there, for example, there are big communities who talk two languages at the same time. And if you look at Czechia, or if you look at the former Yugoslavian countries, there you cannot put that aside, that these people talk several languages, and by way of several languages, they are going to mediate between cultures.
Und das kann als positives Beispiel aufgefasst werden, einerseits. Andererseits bin ich den Übersetzern immer noch dankbar, dass ich die großartige rumänische Literatur oder Autoren wie Ivo Andrić kennenlernen konnte.
So this is one positive side of language, and also I'm very grateful for the Romanian translators who mediate between cultures and gave us the works of Ivo Andrić in Hungarian and in other languages.
Thank you, László. We'll turn to Anna. Just to let you know, you can make your comments or ask questions during the discussion. You'll be able to speak in English or Hungarian. We'll be having that translated.
So thank you for these splendid lectures, which I both enjoyed a lot. But it seems that I'm ending up in a position where I think I have to challenge a few things that you've just said. So one thing is that I think it's very important to differentiate between national literature and nationalism as an extreme ideology. I wouldn't say that there's no such thing as national literature. But before I go on explaining what I mean, let me make a small detour and say something about what I found out 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I did a kind of a small research, or rather a quick search, not a representative research, about what writers write about when they want to address public issues, what Hungarian writers write about, and what writers who publish in English write about when they want to speak about something they think of as an important issue 10 years ago. In Hungary, 9 writers out of 10 criticized the government's policy and use of language for being extreme nationalists, for undermining solidarity, and so on and so forth. As for the English language publications, 9 out of 10 writers wrote about environmental issues and our responsibility about them. At that time, 10 years ago, that's not a very long period in history, it seemed that there was absolutely no synchron between the English-speaking literary bird and the Hungarian-speaking literary bird. But since then, due to our experience of the migration crisis, of Donald Trump and Brexit, and the growing significance of national extremism, it seems that we've arrived on common ground again. We have one common enemy, that's nationalism, which I absolutely agree. But if we are too complacent in thinking that now we are on common ground, we might forget to address issues of in what position and who can say things like there's no such thing as national literature, that we have this wonderful international conversation, and I absolutely agree that an international discussion is one of the best weapons to fight nationalism. But are we in the same position in this international conversation, or are we not? I am speaking in English, some here are speaking in their first languages, some others are not speaking in their first languages. So I think the whole thing is a bit more complicated than that. I think that saying in German that there is no such thing as national literature is very different from saying it in Hungarian, in a much smaller language with a very little chance to get translated, for example, and to reach an international audience. So what I am trying to say that, yes, nationalism as an extremist ideology is something we all agree we have to fight, but it doesn't come with it that we can simply announce that it's the end of national literatures.
Kann ich ad hoc gleich was dazu sagen? Ich weiß nicht, ob ich mich irre, aber ich glaube doch, dass es viel länger schon Literatur gibt, als es Nationen gibt.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that literature has existed much earlier compared to the nations.
Und auch wenn Ungarisch eine kleine Sprache ist, unter Anführungszeichen, und ich auch verstehe, und das ist auch logisch, das ist auch im Deutschen letztlich so, dass ungarische Literatur anders lesen als Nicht-Ungarn, aber für Ungarn es auch eine größere Bedeutung hat. Was sagt das über unsere Geschichte, über unser Leben, über unser Denken aus? Für Ungarn ist ungarische Literatur sowas wie Selbstreflexion. Für alle Nicht-Ungarn ist ungarische Literatur, wenn sie übersetzt wird, Reflexion des Menschseins. Und wenn sie das nicht ist, ist sie keine Literatur. Und das ist egal, ob das jetzt ungarische Literatur ist, Liechtensteiner Literatur oder amerikanische Literatur. Entweder es funktioniert über die Sprache hinaus als Menschheitsliteratur oder es ist keine Literatur. Aber ich verstehe zum Beispiel, es gibt einen bedeutenden österreichischen Romancier, Heimito von Doderer. Aus mir unbekannten Gründen ist er nicht weltberühmt. Für meine Selbstreflexion als Wiener, nicht als österreichischer Nationalist, aber als Wiener ist er extrem wichtig. Und ich glaube, er wäre auch sehr wichtig für einen Budapester oder für eine, ja, und so weiter. Aber wie gesagt, man liest die Literatur seiner Sprache als Selbstreflexion und man liest die Literatur der Welt als Weltreflexion.
So if we talk about Hungarian literature, Hungarian language is very small, of course, in quotation marks. And I understand that it is logical, and also is the same for the Germans, that for those who are Hungarian, for them Hungarian literature is different. They read Hungarian literature in a different way than those who are non-Hungarian. But if you look at Hungarian literature and you are a Hungarian, it means for you, it has a much bigger importance for you from the point of view of history, thinking, lifestyle, or self-reflection. And if you are not a Hungarian and you read Hungarian literature in translation, then it is reflection, but it is reflection for you of mankind, the reflection of mankind, and it is the same for Hungarian literature, for the literature of Liechtenstein or the USA. So it will be the reflection of mankind. And for me, that literature which does not function outside language is not called literature. Or for example, I could mention a famous Austrian author who is not world famous, and I just cannot understand why he's not world famous, because, for example, he would be very interesting from the point of view of those who live in Budapest as well, or for other people in the world.
Thank you, Robert. I think just, I don't know if László wants to say anything, but I just want to just maybe add, I remember meeting a Canadian author a few years ago whose book had been very successful in an Asian country. Can't remember which country, but it had been translated. And she found out years after that in that country they'd put a happy ending on the story where she had killed the character. And one of the explanations was that in our culture this didn't feel right. So even translation can be almost a kind of national project to homogenize rather than step out. So it's very interesting. And László, did you want to say anything? Or
just one sentence was something came to my mind when I was listening to you. I was listening to the translation of what you said. Yes, I think you're right. Of course, we have a different approach to our to literature written in our own language and to literature in translation. And maybe in some cases, I agree with you that in literature in translation, we look for some more general human experience. But at the same time, I often experience that, for example, as for Hungarian writers in translation in the UK, they are often expected to be, or they are often read as documents of a different experience, and not as something that tells about some universal experience. The exotism of a supposedly different country, a supposedly different culture is often an important drive for reading.
That's an interesting point. I was going to pass over to Sophie.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly, and I think, it was interesting to hear, especially from translators, this question of translation coming into ideas around the formation of a national literature, because it seems to me, as a translator and as a reader and as a critic, that often the work that is selected from a given country to be, in my case, specifically translated into English, is selected on the basis that it sort of supports an English perception of that country. So there's a lot of sort of, selection at the point before the translation that takes place before, the work is brought into English. And I just wanted to make the point of the translator as a very influential and sometimes manipulative presence in the formation of a national literature, sometimes only as the kind of agent of the editors, who are perhaps the real gatekeepers in that case. Just wanted to, and it was really interesting as well to hear Daljit say about the end of the translation being so drastically changed from the source. And also there was the other example of a writer sounding completely different in the German, but isn't that down to the particular translator rather than the pure act of translating? I guess just supporting what you said and making a general point about translation and the importance of it within this discussion.
Thanks, Sophie. Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you, Sophie. Vielleicht sollten wir einfach aufhören, über Nationalliteratur zu sprechen. Der Begriff ist ja schon vollkommen grotesk. Ja, Nationalliteratur ist ein Begriff, der ist so jung wie die Idee der Nation. Und Literatur ist viel älter. Vielleicht sollten wir reden über Literatur von Sprachräumen oder Literatur von Kulturen, aber nicht von Nationalliteratur. Das ist vollkommen grotesk. Und vor allem legt der Begriff Nationalliteratur nahe, dass Literatur ideologisch missbraucht wird. Und gleichzeitig zeigt ja die Geschichte, dass alle die geglaubt haben, ihr Glück zu machen, wenn sie sich missbrauchen lassen, von der Geschichte vergessen wurden. Alle Dichter und alle Schriftsteller der Nazizeit werden nicht mehr gelesen. Und die waren die geglaubt haben, Nationalliteratur zu schreiben.
So maybe we should stop talking about national literature, because the concept itself is already very grotesque. National literature is young as the nation itself, and literature is much, much older. The literature of cultures, the literature of regions is much, much older, and maybe we can talk about these types of literature. But the national literature as a concept, this this concept is very close to the concept of ideology used for bad purposes. So, for example, if I talk about the Nazi times, fascism, those writers who cooperated with the Nazis, they abused literature when they thought that they wrote national literature, and they are already forgotten.
Aber wir Ungarn wollen nicht nur Nationalliteratur haben, wir haben auch an jeder Ecke eine nationale Tabakwarenhandlung.
But we Hungarians do not only want to have national literature, because in every corner you have a national tobacco shop as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of smoking that goes on in Hungary, yeah, I've noticed. And yet we have cultural armies in each country who want to narrow the range of the country's literature. As Sophie said, even abroad, the literature that best serves that country. So we can't escape the identification or the narrowing of the national story, which maybe for us writers is very frustrating, isn't it? Yes,
absolutely. I think I like your approach to national literature. National literature is absurd if it's an exclusive notion. If the definition of national literature is ideological, but I still believe that there is an inclusive notion of national literature. The authors László listed who didn't write in Hungarian. I think writers who nowadays don't write in Hungarian but come from Hungarian origin, they can be seen as included in national literature. So I think you're right. We don't need to further discuss this. But I think the real problem is not the idea of an inclusive national literature, but the idea of a national literature when a certain group in power decides what belongs to national literature, no matter in which language it was written and what not. That's where the real problems start.
Okay, thank you. Shall we move on to maybe a very different... a question, a comment. Shall I bring the mic?
Sure, yeah, I'm Joseph Ferenc. I'm on behalf of the Széchenyi Academy of Letters and Arts here. And, well, just a brief comment. So, to be able to decide whether there is such a thing as national literature, we should be able to define what nation is, and I know no satisfactory definition. Until a few years ago, I was teaching Irish literature at Eötvös University, Budapest, so I have sort of worked myself into the various definitions of nation. Now, we know what nationalism is. Nationalism is an ideological movement that deploys this code word nation, very resilient and can be used to sort of instigate people into, as you just properly said, sort of criminal acts. The point is that nationalism uses a notion which is undefined, still undefined. There is no satisfactory, all-embracing, applicable definition of a nation, I think. But if anyone in this room can come up with a definition, I would gladly listen to that. Yeah.
I just quote two authors. A Dutch historian once described a nation as an ongoing conversation about the nation itself. And another famous pragmatic definition of a nation is by Nietzsche, who said in the Nachlass, a nation consists of people who speak the same language and read the same newspapers. If you think about that, I think he was right. It's a very pragmatic definition. I think that most Canadians read newspapers in French, in Quebec, of course, which I know quite well, or in English, which is the rest of Canada and the dominant part of Canada. But I can assure you that in Quebec, yeah, 2 languages, but how many Canadians are really bilingual? I come from a country myself where there are 3 official languages, but where the... Ah, okay. Okay, but no, I just wanted to give 2 definitions, which are... Oh, sorry.
Just could you please use the microphone?
I just wanted to add one more remark. I listened very carefully, Robert, to what you said. To me, national literature is not a problem. It's how you define it. So my definition would be very open, as I tried to make clear by quoting these 2 possible definitions of nation. And I think it's always afterwards. I very like your concept of self-reflection. Huh? It's only afterwards, for instance, when I speak about Flanders is a nation, but it's not a state. So that makes it interesting. It's a region of Belgium. It's not a state. It doesn't have to be a state for me. But you could describe it as a kind of a nation, because if you look at it now, there are 2 fundamental books in which the self-reflection of what it means to be a Fleming are expressed. And that's the famous novel by Hugo Claus, The Sorrow of Belgium, which is translated into many languages. And I think it gives a good idea of what we think we are. We're not quite sure what we are, but in which we try to define, or we recognize ourselves. And the second book was written in the second half of the 19th century in French. I'm speaking about the great book of Charles de Coster, La Légende du Lenspiegel. We all know the type, the iconic type of Eulenspiegel. Well, this book was written in French, but it's a book that expresses Flemish identity. I would quote these 2 books. Afterwards, so I quoted a book from second half of the 20th century, and I gave an example of Claus. The book was written in the 80s of the 20th century. These 2 books, for me, as a Fleming, as a Belgian citizen, are books that express the way we see ourselves. So, afterwards, you can see that. Of course, they didn't have the intention of writing nationalistic literature, but you can describe today their books as endeavors to express what it means to live in that given space. Place. You know the difference between place and space. We are all rooted in a kind of place. And at the same time, we have to accept that, I think. And this can be a country, a nation, a language. And at the same time, we have a mission in life. It's to belong to a huger space, which is a global space. And I think the dialectical tension between these 2 is what it's all about. Accepting place and trying to reach a space. I would end with saying, perhaps you have to be provincial if you want to become cosmopolitan.
Very interesting. I want to take that space idea on now to, I know the wine's being poured, I think, but we will continue talking first. We shall earn our drinks. Thinking of space, thinking of social media, maybe. I was recently working on a program about African poets from various African countries who have felt liberated because they can bypass the gatekeepers and promote their work around the world. And previously, they have to try and find a publishing house in their country, maybe spend another 2-3 years trying to get their work outside of their own country. So that's an example where social media has offered great advantages for authors to write the provincial tale and find it hit the global space. But at the same time, social media seems to be threatening for many authors. It sort of undermines their creative freedom or they're being held to account. And I just wondered what your thoughts were on the social media platforms, or its impact on your writing, or in the abstract or in general? Any observations you would like to share with us now? Anna?
I think quite a lot of things, but let's tie this back to nationalism. Social media is maybe the most threatening place of spreading extremism and spreading nationalism, this kind of extremist nationalism. So I think all the optimism about social media's ability to democratize societies and to create a really democratic public space where people will take part in educated discussions, and which will bring an end to extremism, for example. It doesn't seem so. So I absolutely sympathetic with writers who think that social media is not the right place for them, not the right place for either publishing or discussing questions like this. So I think there is this huge potential, of course, to reach audiences you have no chance to reach otherwise. But at the same time, the past 3 or 4 years have proved social media to be the most threatening spaces for liberal democracies.
If you say there are 2 novels in which you it was confirmed in your Flemish identity, this I can understand. But yeah, it's perfectly understandable. But what I can't understand is to say, because of these 2 novels, we have a national literature. This is completely crazy. Sorry for that. Yeah. And on the other hand, I admire Belgium because to say we are a nation and we have 2 novels of national literature is the kind of nation I can stand. Okay. But let's come back to the point. National literature. In history, since 1 million of years, everything, every phenomenon, every epoch, every thing what happened in environment and social life and mankind development and so on, had 2 clearly defined moments. A beginning and the end. Yeah? Okay. Why do you think that especially the idea of nation, which came up in the 19th century, should be the first phenomenon in history without end? Okay? And therefore, I can guarantee you, as long as mankind is able to write and to think and to discuss and to produce books, we will have literature. But as long as mankind has development, we will come to the point very soon to look back and say, this chapter in history finally is closed, and at the end it is the chapter of the idea of nation and nationalism. Okay? So, if we continue to discuss what is national literature, I begin to be very, very bored.
Let's not bore Robert. It could be a very painful evening at the drinks counter. You'll have to wait for your cigarette and your drink, Robert. How do we overcome these problems? Nations are obsessed with the marketing of their own literature. In various countries like my own, Britain, translated books don't sell. People are obsessed. There's a whole militia championing national literature, trying to tell that story. What do we do? Is it at university level we need to challenge this, or where should we take the fight? Maybe, sorry.
Well, I think it is challenged in readers' minds already. So this kind of exclusive.
Again, it's controlled over there.
Take this.
Okay, thanks. Okay, thanks. Sorry. So I think it's challenged in readers' minds. I believe that most readers do not follow an exclusive nationalist agenda when picking books. Or I think this kind of the kind of nationalism we all seem to be very critical of. It's more maintained by the extremist groups and politicians. I don't think it is a defining factor in the way people read nowadays.
Schools, in politics, you have a chancellor, president, you have schools and official school politics and so on.
Yes, but well, in my experience, the capacity of schools to persuade kids to read has diminished so much that I don't think they have any effect on the way people pick books nowadays. So if you have a look at, are you familiar with the phenomenon of BookTube? These are YouTube channels created by people in their 20s, and they discuss books there. They love to read. They are ardent readers. They have plenty of books. They order books for a lot of money. They are real readers. I'm familiar with both the English-speaking BookTube and the Hungarian-speaking BookTube. I don't think that reflects what they were taught at school at all.
Thank you for that, Anna. One of the things I guess frustrates me living in Britain is we don't really read books by people of a different colour. We don't have Indian, for example, Indian tradition, the epics. We don't touch them really. We don't really look at literature from Africa. So we do look at sort of European, American, Australian, but not really the kind of... So I don't know if it's a colour divide or just that, what goes on, but it's very unsettling to me, that kind of... where maybe we just read the West, and that's...
This is British autism. This is the classic British autism. Rule Britannia is the basic idea. So everything what is necessary to be important in the world comes from them, the Brits themselves. Yeah. On the other hand, you have Naipaul, for example, an Indian Nobel Prize winner. Yeah. Now, pardon?
Yeah. Yeah. I forgot his name. Yeah. Yeah. But both. Yeah. Abdul Razak, who very English in his writing style, as was Naipaul. So I wonder if they transcend that style to really represent otherness enough. Naipaul is more English than the English. He lived near Stonehenge. So. And anyway, sorry, we are talking, but we'd like to hear from the audience. This is Friday night. This is your evening. If you would like to make a comment or ask a question, this is the time now. Please feel free to raise your hand, and I'll bring the microphone over to you. It always takes a while for the first question, so I shall wait patiently. Robert, you're not going for your cigarette. Yes, please do, Anna.
About what you... Okay, thank you. Sorry again. So yes, I think I just want to say one more sentence about how approach to national literature should be changed. In Hungary, in recent years, the government's cultural policy has made efforts to change the audience's approach to literature. They tried to promote literature which they considered to be real national literature, ideological, in my view, not very high-level literature. So they created all kinds of programs and support publishers who publish this kind of literature. But they, again and again, they get very frustrated because readers don't buy it. They go to the bookshops and they don't buy it. So I think this is different from what you were talking about. This West-centered, white-centered canon which readers follows. But I think it is important in terms of the scope of this problem. So maybe it's not such a huge problem. This promotion of nationalism for readers of contemporary literature, as it seems to us.
Okay, we're coming up to 8:30. I'm going to see if anybody has a comment or question they would like to make. Otherwise, I think I'm quite keen to wrap this evening's battle with the empty sky up. So we will be hosting our next event, I believe, in Madrid from the European Alliance of Academies in November. I hope December the 2nd, I believe. I hope you will be able to join us there, where we'll take another formidable topic and argue over that issue. So for the moment, I would like to thank László. Please give him a round of applause. I would like to thank Anna. And of course, who couldn't thank Robert? And we have our 2 translators. One is in the hutch. 3 translators. And Ferenc, thank you for making this incredible digital setup and in-person setup. Thank you. I'm going to pass over to Ferenc now for the hospitality element, I believe.
Thank for all of you for this amazing 2 days that we spent here in Budapest. It's very nice actually working on events of Alliance of Academies, and I hope that all you will hear from us again very soon. So all of you who are watching this at home, it's time to say goodbye. Thank you for everything. And for the local audience, we have some snacks and drinks. Please feel free to join us. And thank you and good evening.